Hello, everyone. Welcome from the Writers Guild Foundation to this event, speaking to esteemed showrunner Carlton Cuse about his career and about his latest show, 5 Days at Memorial. I should start by saying that I am not an unbiased person in this conversation. Carlton gave me my first staff job literally 25 years ago. He was my boss. He was a very kind mentor, and he has remained a friend. And I've admired him as a person, as a writer, as a showrunner, and as a friend all these years. So if you're looking for some sort of expose, you're unlikely to find it tonight from me. But we do want to get into the business of showrunning. And I'm going to ask some questions that I'd like to know. But first, Carlton, just want to say welcome to you. We have a lot of people that want to hear from you. You've worked on some iconic shows over the years. My first question for you is Briscoe County. The Adventures of Briscoe County was your very first showrunning job. What is the thing that 2022 Carlton Cuse wishes he could tell the showrunner of the Adventures of Briscoe County? What is the thing that you wish you had known then, what you do know now?
Not starting with a softball, Shawn. Oh my gosh, there's so many things. I mean, I just think the general kind of terror and panic that I was experiencing doing my first show is something that I wish it's going to be okay. But that show was crazy. So we got ordered and premiered early. We ended up making 27 episodes of that show in the first season. We got an order of 12, we got a back 9, and then we got a back 5, which was so distressing that one of the writers just quit. He said, I can't do it anymore. And we were also shooting that show on a 7-day schedule. So every 7 days we had to have a script. So I spent quite a few nights sleeping in my office. It was crazy, but it was also fun and exhilarating. But I was kind of, I think I was adrenalized by sort of pure panic most of the time. And of course, it was my first show, and I didn't realize how great an experience it was. I mean, we were shooting on the Warner Brothers lot on Laramie Street, which was this Western town that was in the back corner of the Warner Brothers lot where they'd shot Maverick and iconic movies. And it's now office buildings and production bungalows. But at the time, we were running cattle through there. There were horses. We had all these great wranglers from the classic movies of the 70s and 80s, and people, it was just, I don't know, it was just, we would barbecue on Friday afternoons on set at, sort of at the end of the day. And it was kind of magical. And I didn't realize kind of how fully special it was until later, when I was able to put it in perspective,
There is a realization, I think, as a showrunner, you have that, oh my God, we put it in the script and they're actually going to do it. I think before you see that, there's a belief that they'll change. This won't really sort of happen, but I
remember the writer of an episode had written something like, and I can't even remember the context, but it was like, he's propelled out of the water like a rocket. And then all of a sudden we were in a production meeting and there was the special effects guy, starting to pitch all these ways in which they were going to launch a human from underwater out from underneath this water. And the writer was like, that was just kind of a colorful metaphor. We don't actually have to launch somebody from under the water. And it was a good lesson in the, yes, what you literally write happens. And sometimes to the misery of your cast. And it is kind of unknowing. I mean, I remember one time when I was in Hawaii and we'd written this Lost script in which was like Kate and Jack scramble up a muddy embankment in the driving rain. And there was Matthew Fox and Evangeline Lilly climbing up a muddy embankment under rain towers, and their teeth were chattering. And then they were, kept getting in, 5 fresh towels after every take. And it was like, oh yeah, it's easy to type it and it's harder to do it.
Yeah. That show didn't run as long as you might have liked it to have run. Do you have a fear when that first show isn't the big monster? It certainly remains a cult classic, I think, to this day. But but you get canceled after a couple seasons, I think it was.
Well, just one
Do you have
season,
a
it
fear,
ran
like
27 episodes. That was it. Yeah.
Right, so they want all 27 episodes, but then they don't want a second season. Is there a fear that, like, well, that was my one shot? Am I gonna do this? Or did you feel like, okay, that was a lesson and now I can sort of go up from here?
I felt more the latter. I felt like, okay, this is great. I mean, I think I can do this again. And weirdly and circumstantially, I was kind of launched into my second show, which happened because when I was doing that show for Warner Brothers Television. At the time I was making Briscoe, the head of Warner Brothers Television was Les Moonves. Les Moonves then took over as the head of CBS, and he knew me from Briscoe. And literally, as Briscoe was winding down, and he called me up and said, "Hey, I just took this new job at CBS, and I've inherited a commitment to Don Johnson to make a series, and there's some scripts and nothing is really like working. Would you be interested in meeting with Don Johnson?" And I was a big fan of Miami Vice, and I just wanted to meet Don Johnson. And I went, I found him
Charming guy.
very charming. And that was kind of the key, was the fact that Miami Vice was very nihilistic, and he wanted to come back and do a series. And what I saw of Don was super charming and charismatic. And I was like, oh. And I'd worked on a couple of Lethal Weapon movies, and I was like, oh, he could do that. I mean, he's actually really charming. And this idea of sort of contrasting a guy who was great as a cop, but kind of was, his personal life was not so great, just seemed like a really good concept. And sort of showing Don as a great cop, but also charming and funny and charismatic and all that. So it kind of meeting him really clicked. And then I said to him, look, his two conditions were, he wanted to shoot the show in San Francisco where he had started his career, because he had worked at the American Repertory Theater as an actor there. And then his other condition I didn't meet, which was he wanted to do a detective show. And I was like, I'd rather do a cop show. Cops are altruistic. You don't have to deal with the issue or motive of why they're doing something. And he he gave in on that. And I said, look, I'm going to go to San Francisco. I'm going to research this. I'll write you a pilot, and then you can just decide whether you wanted to do it. And when I turned the script in, Don liked it. And then it went into CBS with Don's, excitement for it. And Les Moonves greenlit it to series on the pilot script. So suddenly we were doing 14 episodes of the show. And so there wasn't really any downtime between those two
to get
shows.
depressed and worry about your career.
Yeah.
One thing I want to talk about is casting and the importance of we all know that you can write the greatest script, and if you cast the show improperly, you're in trouble. And I think your shows, throughout your career, have shown a real eye for talent and for casting, but also the ability to sort of switch maybe what your original idea. Talk about the casting of Joe in that show. That wasn't the character you initially wrote, right?
No,
you didn't imagine Cheech Marin as this role, but talk about your ability to pivot when you see some magic.
Well, I mean, what happened there was, I had originally written a character in the pilot of Nash Bridges called Joe Dunnigan, who was an Irish cop who was Nash's ex-partner, who was basically in the pilot to carry expositional water. He was going to kind of explain some of the backstory of Don's career, and then also he was going to get killed partway through the pilot, which was going to sort of further Don's character's motivation to get the bad guys. I went down to Tucson, Arizona, where Don was shooting the movie Tin Cup, Ron Shelton's movie with Kevin Costner. And Cheech Marin was in that movie playing Kevin Costner's caddy. And he and Don were friends. And so we ended up having lunch in in the commissary tent. and Don and Cheech were joking around and having such a great time. And I was like, maybe Dunnigan could become Dominguez. And so, and then we started shooting the pilot. And also I just saw how much chemistry there was. It was like, there's no way we can kill Cheech Marin. Like, he's too good. And so really the show pivoted on this moment and went from being a, a single lead cop show to being this buddy cop show with the two of them. And, and just tried, and, Shawn worked on Nash, and we spent a lot of time in that room just working. As much as plot matters in procedural cop shows for CBS, the thing that really was the magic in that show was the chemistry between Don and Cheech.
Yeah, and the B stories, and there was some lovely sort of B story. And by the way, Don sort of got his way, because there were these detective stories that he and Cheech would sort of do on the side, in addition to the cop stuff.
Yeah,
so
I know that was really fun.
You kind of granted his wish retroactively, it seems like.
My favorite one was when we had Barry Bonds on as a guest star, and someone had stolen his first car, which I think was like a Pinto, and he had gone into a slump as a baseball player, so they had to find the stolen car. So, but yeah, I mean, there was all the personal stories were really fun, and we had this writer Jed Seidel, who was particularly great at coming up with the B stories, and yeah, it was an incredible room and really fun show to work on in that respect. The writing of the show was really fun.
You have a reputation as having a really great eye for writers, and we know how hard it is to do a show if you don't have that great writers room supporting you. What do you look for in writers when you're hiring as a showrunner? Do you think just of the individuals? Are you envisioning kind of like a baseball team of this person's going to do this person's going to do that? How have you put together these really great rooms of super talented writers over the years?
I'm just like, how close can you come to being Shawn Ryan is basically
First of all, the amount of rewriting you and John did on my scripts that first season, you can't butter me up now. So
I mean, it's a hard thing to define, but I feel like I do have a good ability to read a script and then just go, oh, this person has talent. I mean, I guess it's like scouting in baseball or something. I have a pretty discerning eye to sort of recognizing talent for writers. And and it was really, my rule is always, I won't meet with a writer without having read them and liked them, because at the end of the day, it comes down to what's on the page. And, I read your script and was like, oh, this guy really knows how to write. And you weren't any kind of an established writer, but I just saw potential there. I mean, the same was true when I read, a script by Damon Lindelof, and, it just happened that we ended up collecting a bunch of really talented writers to work on that show together. And, I guess this kind of comes down to, does the script make me feel something? Am I engaged? Is it evoking an emotional response? And, you had the ability to do that from a very, early part of your career, and in a way that
it only took me till my 15th spec script to be able to do that, but it doesn't always happen right away.
Well, okay, but then by the time you read the first one I read was like, okay, yeah, this is good. And Shawn was incredible in the room. I mean, and I think he's overstating how much we rewrote him, but he was just like, and sometimes you discover special talents that writers have. And, Shawn was just fantastic at pitching and coming up with ideas for episodes. And we made 121 Nash Bridges or something like that, or 119.
I worked on 68 of them. And Yeah, well, I felt when I
We
came
worked
in,
on
I came in.
68 of them, so that's a lot of stories that we
Yeah,
had to
no,
generate.
I learned so much, but when I came in, there were already people in established roles. You talked about how good Jed was with the B stories and the Cheech stuff. Reed was so good with, you know, the action
Top
stuff.
stuff.
John Worth
Okay.
was running the room, was your very strong number two. You had, you know, the overall vision of the show. And I was like, well, what's my role? And I was like, well, maybe if I can push the story forward in a way in the room, you know, I'm not going to be the guy doing the production rewrites, this and that, but maybe I could be useful in that way. So I tried really hard in that regard.
Well, to go back to
So
your
your first,
question, I mean, I think it is a lot of it's like building an orchestra. Like you certainly don't want to hire a bunch of carbon copies of the same person in the room. You want to try to find people who have different talents. And I think that's where we ended up. I mean, Reed was outstanding at writing action and coming up with gags and doing cool cop stuff. And Jed was fantastic with the personal stories and was really funny. And, you know, and John had wonderful sense of character and kind of connected all of the dots, you know, narratively. And you were, you know, pushing story and coming up with really clever, fun ideas. I mean, yeah, everybody kind of fell into a role, and that's kind of what's necessary, particularly when we were having to crank out a script every 8 days and make as many as 24 episodes of the show a year.
that was a 7-day shoot, I think.
It started as a 7-day shoot, and then I think it morphed into, I think, an 8-day shoot. Yeah, but it was, I mean,
right.
which, yeah, so we were having to have a script every 7 to 8 days. And it's kind of, when I look back on those days, I mean, you still work in network television, but it just is, it's like lifting a car off an infant or something. Like it's those stories. I can't, it's hard to imagine like how we did that.
I have very fond memories. So your first two shows, you're the sole showrunner. You're the, you know, unquestioned leader of the show. Then you come on board Lost very, very quickly after the pilot, and other shows that you've done since then. You know, I think of Bates Motel and Jack Ryan, and, you know, coming to 5 days at Memorial. You have partnered with people, and you're sort of, you know, doing some, talk about the difference of, and I've done both as well, and I think there are positives and negatives to both sides, but talk about the difference between, you know, sharing these responsibilities, but, you know, having to negotiate at times with a partner versus being the, you know, the sort of sole, you know, final voice of things.
I think as my career has gone along, I have really fallen in love with the joint showrunner model. I love that. I was reading an interview with Vince Gilligan recently where he was talking about how the auteur theory of film is bullshit, that everything is collaborative. And I fully agree and embrace that. I think that for me, having a partner doing a show is great because you have some, like having a like-minded person to bounce ideas off, to problem solve, to help defend the realm, because, you know, writing the show isn't enough. Then you end up having to defend your vision to actors, to the network, to you know, everyone involved, and having someone to share the responsibilities with, and to you know, in some cases divide and conquer those responsibilities. I just love that. So, you know, for me, once I came on Lost, and, you know, I was sort of brought on Lost to be the showrunner, but I saw my job as training Damon Lindelof into kind of training him to become a showrunner, because I felt that his vision and what he had done before I got on the show was so critical to the series that it was an essential element to make the show work. And yeah, I mean, I felt like I was bringing a lot to the table, but the show would not have been anything like what it was without Damon's particular genius. And so I sort of trained him up to be a showrunner, and then we ran it together, and I was like, oh, this works great. And that just made me fall in love with that model. And so I did the same with Carrie Aaron on Bates Motel, and with Graham Rowland on Jack Ryan, and with Meredith Averill on Locke Key, and with John Ridley on 5 Days at Memorial. And it's just, I have done other projects where I've been more the sole showrunner, like on The Strain, which I did with, it was a show that was based on a trilogy of novels by Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan. There wasn't sort of an equal showrunner on that, but there was Chuck was around, and there was an incredibly talented group of writers, and there were really strong team of writers named Weddle and Thompson. And so it was also collaborative, and that to me is the essence of what I love. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning. That's what I love about television, is the collaborative process. I haven't really found that it's been contentious. I mean, I think, Damon and I had a rule on Lost, which was, one of us could play the trump card. If we felt really, really strongly about something, we could overrule the other person, and that you were allowed to play the trump card. Neither of us ever played the trump card. If we weren't seeing eye to eye on something, it was truly because we hadn't arrived at the right solution, and we would find sort of a third way that made us both happy, that usually we both felt was better than what either of us had been pitching before that. So I think that in working out aesthetic and creative differences, you're really problem solving and working towards maybe the best version of what a scene should be, or what a character should do, or where a story wants to go. And I don't like doing that by myself as much as I like doing that with someone else. What about you?
I feel the same way. My most recent show, which is The Night Agent, which will premiering on Netflix in March, big plug. I did that one by myself, and it was the first one I'd done sort of without a partner a little bit, and I enjoyed being able to make quick decisions. But I think ultimately I also like the partner model a lot, and I appreciate it. And I can't think of any big arguments I had with partners on things, because if you're having an argument, it means that there is something a little bit wrong. And so you'd find a third way, like you're talking about that. Oh, now that we're both happy, we now know that's the right idea. So I think that's great. One of the things I've really admired about your career is that you can't really pigeonhole you into any specific genres. You've done cop shows, a Western, sci-fi stuff. The latest show is just a haunting, beautiful look. It's something that's based on true events. And how do you pick the things that you want to do? Because really what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to commit the next year to 5 years to whatever of my life, really being in this world and telling these stories. So how do you, as a showrunner, and as a successful one, you have a lot of options now. How do you make the decision? This is the world I want to write about. This is the world I want to live in.
I think the more I go along in my career, the less I think about it, the more it's just a visceral and emotional decision. I mean, if I'm presented with an idea, then I usually will ask to take, at least a few days to ruminate about it. And then it's just a question of whether, it, catches fire in my brain somewhere and I find myself thinking about it. Or if I myself have an idea, am I constantly thinking about it? Is it something that I'm sort of working on, turning over in my brain? And so it's kind of just it's more of an emotional process, and just does that idea kind of continue to really activate me? And I think it's sort of a test drive of exactly what you're saying, Shawn, which is, in the series world, you're going to be spending a lot of time on this for a lot of years. And honestly, even in a limited, like 5 Days at Memorial, I spent 2 years working on 8 episodes of that show. And so even in the case of a show that was 8 episodes and done, that was still 2 years of my life. So that decision has got to be based on something that really activates you and really makes you feel excited that that you could do that and you could spend that time on it. And then in terms of just the amount of different things I've done, I don't know, I mean, I'm probably not the only person who looks up to Steven Spielberg, but I look up to Steven Spielberg, and I'm for many reasons, because he's a brilliant filmmaker, but I also really respect the fact that he has worked in almost every genre and has worked incredibly successfully in very different genres, from doing comedic action adventures like Indiana Jones to really, kind of one of the greatest horror movies of all time in Jaws, to really
Schindler's
insightful
List.
dramas like Schindler's List or Lincoln, and I think probably the two things are very connected. So for me to get that activated by an idea, I'm not that interested in going back over territory that I've done before. There has to be something new about it. There has to be some new challenge in it that excites me.
I'm sure we have a ton of Lost fans here, and so I don't go too much because it was such an impactful, amazing, and really, a show that now would be a streaming, 8 episode or 10 episode season thing. Back then, you were making 20 episodes those first few seasons before you and Damon were able to negotiate sort of easier time.
24, 23,
and the quality.
Yeah.
Oh my God! But this was the beginning. You've taken on, I mean, Nash was never an easy show in terms of San Francisco's not an easy place to film, and we did in real Lost for what we're seeing in TV now, film quality, storytelling. What were the biggest challenges as a showrunner on that? And you're filming off in Hawaii. I've done a show in Hawaii. It's different time zones. There's island fever. It's nuts.
I think it was
talk about the day-to-day running of that show.
I mean, I would say that the two things that stick out to me are, we had usually, somewhere between 6 and 8 episodes in some form of production at a time. So there was a story on the board, there was one in outline, there was one in prep, there was one that was shooting, there were a couple in post. So kind of simultaneously trying to move 6 to 8 shows forward, plus write a show that had like 16 series regulars, a really dense and sprawling mythology, flashbacks, which had a very different style and tone. It was just executing the show was a really, really high bar, and it was just hard. And it was my sort of metaphor for Lost is like was constantly fighting like an apartment building fire with a garden hose. It was just trying to stay ahead of it was impossible to get ahead of the show, but just to kind of keep going. And then just the expectation, that we had for ourselves, not to mention that other people had for us, to kind of keep the quality bar high was really, really challenging. And so it was just, I worked like 80 hours a week for 6 years on that show, like 11 months a year. It was crazy, but that's what it took to do the show. And, I think the thing that was rewarding about the show was that Damon and I set out to kind of make a show that we ourselves would watch. And in so doing, we violated a lot of the tenets of what was acceptable in network television at the time. There weren't serialized shows. There wasn't science fiction. There weren't characters who had done bad things like murder people. There wasn't, there weren't Korean characters doing a third of an episode in Korean, and not all those things were supposed to just be the death knell and kill a show, but those were all the very things that actually made the audience want to watch the show, made it feel different. And so I think it really taught me the lesson that you have to be sort of true to yourself and not to some sort of set of expectations that you think exist, or that in fact maybe do exist. Lost was lucky because there was a guy named Lloyd Braun who was running ABC at the time who greenlit it, and right ahead of him, being fired from the network, and the show kind of slipped between the cracks in a way that allowed it to develop and get made without getting sort of overdeveloped or sanded down in some development process. And all these things that were unique and special and that you weren't supposed to do ended up staying in the DNA of the show. And I think I think all those were the things that made the show feel different and distinct. And those were the things that activated us as writers to and excited us as writers when we were making the show.
I'm told my air connection is going, so I'm out a little bit, so I'm trying to move my laptop and hopefully improve it. So I apologize if my connection's not great. The run of Lost coincided with an explosion on the internet and people being able to talk about TV shows and speculate on what might come next. How has the internet and the ability for people to write and do episode recaps, and in a mystery show like Lost, people are always trying to figure out, is the island hell? Is this that? How has the internet and the ability to hear so directly from fans affected how you might approach show running?
Well, it's funny. I was visiting a friend of mine who's in a Broadway show, and I was waiting for him, and then he came out after the show, and he had this giant stack of fan mail, and I was like, "Oh my God, that's like crazy!" And I remember that when I did Briscoe, and at the beginning of like Nash Bridges, we would get fan mail, and then by the time Lost came around, the internet and social media had come into existence, and that all went away. And it was, it radically changed everything. I mean, we could never have predicted that Lost would happen just at the moment when sort of social media started to evolve. So there was this new technology that was kind of coming into existence at the same time that we were doing the show, and it allowed people to comment on it. And Lost was kind of a crazy, intentionally ambiguous show with a lot of mystery. And so it was kind of the perfect show for people to comment about. And I think that had a tremendous amount to do with Lost getting into the zeitgeist and becoming the show that it was. And I think it was really interesting because people really wanted to feel like they were influencing the show. They would write and they would complain about things, and but on the other hand, they were also saying, well, you must know what you're doing, where you're going, right? Where you're going with your story. And so we were kind of caught between these two poles of people wanting to sort of shape the direction of the show, but also expecting us to have a clear vision for the show. And like the truth as it exists about most things is that the truth was sort of in the middle. We had certain things figured out, and we figured the rest out as we went along. And I think that is the normal creative process. We had sort of big tentpole places that we wanted to go, but we allowed ourselves the creative freedom to discover the right road to take along the way to get to those places. And we did listen to certain things the audience said. Certainly in the case of some of the things that I think we felt were mistakes in hindsight, like bringing a couple of characters out of the chorus, and the audience called foul on that, and we were like, yeah, that was probably not good, and then we buried them alive in the sand. So but I think social media, and then it went further than that, which is, I think then we moved into the kind of ability for people to really troll shows. And I think we also then discovered the sort of pernicious side of social media. I think everyone at the beginning thought social media was this wonderful thing, but then we also came to see that it could be a less than wonderful thing, and that people, and a small group of people, could be very negative on social media, and the amplitude of that small group of people could seem really, really large, and that it was not just a forum for people to be positive, but it was also a forum where people could be really negative. And so we experienced all of that. And obviously the ending of Lost was controversial, and some people liked it and some people didn't like that. And social media certainly amplified that debate.
I want to make sure that we have enough time to talk about your latest project. I wish I could talk more about Bates Motel and Jack Ryan, these other shows in between. But Lost was a big production, and you're globetrotting, doing all this stuff. And now we arrive, Memorial, where you're recreating, the aftermath of the hurricane, Katrina and everything. Talk about the inspiration for doing this. Talk about partnering with John Ridley to bring, the story that's based on actual events to life in such a haunting, beautiful way.
Well, kind of going back to talking about how do you get inspired to do something. I had read Sherry Fink's book shortly after it was published, 5 Days of Memorial, which was this incredibly detailed account of what had happened at Memorial Hospital in New Orleans, where 2,000 people were trapped in this hospital when New Orleans was flooded in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. And her initial reporting and initial article won her the Pulitzer Prize, and then she expanded into this book, and she spent 6 years writing the book, and it was just an incredible story and an incredible feat of journalism. And I just loved it. But unfortunately, the book was first under option to Scott Rudin, and then it was under option to Ryan Murphy. And I just had to kind of wait it out and pray, that I could get a shot at it. And, to my great fortune, those guys weren't able to get the movie made. And then I was able to convince Sherry to let me option it. And then the first thing I did was go to John Ridley. I had been a huge fan of American Crime, and I just thought he was such a talented writer. And as a filmmaker, he had this kind of real intentionality to the way he made his movies and his TV show, but also kind of was deeply humanistic, and it was storytelling that really just went right to the core of your being. And I felt like he was the perfect guy to do the show with, and fortunately John said yes. And his dad was a doctor, and he had sent him the original article, and he said, "What do you think of this?" And his dad said, "Well, I'm glad I was not the person having to make those decisions." And I think that really activated John, because for those of you who haven't seen the show, it's sort of a show that starts as a disaster thriller, but then morphs into a medical ethics drama as these doctors who are trapped in the hospital are confronted with really tough decisions about which patients are going to get care, which patients are not, who's going to get on a helicopter, who's not, things that really have a lot of parallels, obviously, in what we've just gone through in this pandemic. But and then the story kind of turns and follows what happens when a doctor makes a decision to inject a bunch of patients with lethal doses of drugs. And is what she did justified? Is it ever justifiable? Is it possible for us to understand from the comfort of hindsight? And the thing that was really important for me was to not take a position on that. It was to really try to present both sides of the story, to try to present all sides of the story, and allow the audience the opportunity to really make their own judgments. I remember saying to John early, I think the best version of the show is at the end. If it's a little bit like the spinning top at the end of Inception, where hopefully viewers will debate and discuss, what, the events that happen, and whether they, think that she did the right thing or she didn't do the right thing, and just kind of to debate and discuss the decisions that were made under these horrific and terrible conditions. I also think we both wanted it to be an ode to the health workers, who most of whom volunteered to be there and who were laboring under the most difficult and traumatic conditions and trying to help people and do good in the middle of this really horrific tragedy. And that was something that was really important to us. But John was just great and so talented. And we had a wonderful collaboration. We started writing the scripts in September of 2019, and then the pandemic hit in early 2020, and here we were writing a show, and then all of a sudden we were living in such parallel circumstances to this. And I remember John saying to me, history rhymes, and it really felt that way. And then we went off and we ended up shooting all the hospital stuff and the visual effects and special effects stuff in Toronto. And we made that decision because it was just safer. At the time that we made that decision, there was much less COVID in Canada than there was in a place like New Orleans. We ended up going to New Orleans and shooting all the exteriors there later. But, and we were there, we were in Toronto, everybody was locked down. So the only people we were able to associate with were the other people on the production, the cast and the crew. And so we were in the middle of this medical malady, making a show about another medical malady. And that was pretty profound and pretty intense for everybody involved. And everyone was just so committed to telling the story. It was truly such a collaborative effort and such a beautiful and wonderful experience. And, I just hope more people will watch the show. I'm really proud of it. I think it's a really compelling story. And so I hope those of you who are out there listening today will check it out on, it's streaming on Apple. It's 8 episodes. They're not even a full hour each. It's
really a fantastic show. I always hate when I'm jealous that I didn't make something, and you made me a little jealous with this one that I didn't do it. When I worked with David Mamet on the unit, he would talk about good drama isn't the choice between right and wrong. Good drama is a choice between two wrongs. And your show really reminded me of that. That there are so many instances of people having to make, not the right decision, which can oftentimes be morally easy, but having to choose between this wrong decision or that wrong decision. I don't know if you viewed it in that way, but that's how it felt to me.
I mean, I think that fundamentally, I felt, and I still feel that, like, if anything good comes out of 5 Days of Memorial, it'll be that it may help in some level with preparedness, so that the next time there's a disaster, healthcare workers aren't put in a position of having to make decisions about who gets healthcare or who doesn't, because those are just untenable decisions. That is truly a situation where there are no right answers, and and putting healthcare workers in the position of having to ration services or care is terrible. And so anything we can do to avoid that. And Katrina was a failure of authority on multiple levels, for the corporate governance of these hospitals, the state, city, local, federal, FEMA, and as a result, it came down to people having to make just choices between, having to make difficult choices where there was no clear good or right answer.
When you're making a fictional show, everything's sort of at your disposal. As we said, this show is based on actual events. You have a book as some source material. What are your responsibilities as a showrunner, to quote unquote get things right, I guess, or how much leeway are you giving yourself to tell these kinds of stories?
I mean, that's a really good question, and I think that it depends on the project. In the case of this project, I think that John and I felt we owed a tremendous amount of fidelity to the book and the original story. Obviously, some fictionalization was necessary. There's some fictional characters, and obviously it's a dramatization. We invented dialogue that people said, and it is a work of fiction, but we tried to really respect the facts of the original story as much as we could in the way we told this. And I guess we kept thinking about people in New Orleans watching the show and wanting them to feel like it was a true, non-sensationalized, not like overpumped, overhyped drama. I wanted it to really feel like, people who had gone through this could feel like this was a fair and just representation of, dramatically that sort of emotionally kind of conveyed sort of the truth of the experiences of what it was like to be in that place at that time.
I'm going to ask one final question. I'm going to open to a Q&A for and start putting them in the Q&A section. So my last question for you, Carlton, is when I knew you as a showrunner, you weren't directing. You now have started to direct a lot. The last I saw you in person, you mentioned to me one of the reasons, at least. I'm curious if you remember what your answer was, but talk about why you've chosen to direct more often now, and then how does that affect your showrunning job? What are you giving up on the showrunning side to direct?
I think that, you know, sort of philosophically, I believe that the best thing you can do as a creative person is just continually try to get better at what you do. And, you know, for me, I'm constantly just working at trying to improve my craft. And I felt like learning how to direct was a part of that. And that it was also a little scary, which I also think is good. And that it posed a set of challenges that were different than show running. And I was excited about those challenges and trying to figure out if I could do it and how to do it. And it's hard. I mean, I think the amount of variables at your disposal as a director is in a way infinite. And so you have, you know, just all these decisions you have to make about how you're going to tell a story. And that's a fascinating process. And it's one that I'm less skilled at than show running. And so the challenge of trying to get better at that and learn how to do that is something that really motivates me right now. I also like the experience of interacting with the crew and the cast as a director, which again is different and more intimate and has a different kind of bearing than as a showrunner. And I feel like being able to kind of do that and then go back into my role as a showrunner, I feel like a deeper sense of connection with my collaborators. And I think those are probably the two main reasons. Are either of those the reason that I said to you?
You mentioned that you thought you could learn more, that
Yeah.
you've done so much show running that you thought you could learn and become a better showrunner by starting to direct.
Yeah.
Which I found interesting because I'm someone who has not pursued directing at all. And you actually made me think for the first time about, well, is that something I should do? Could I, learn a different side of this? I still haven't decided to do it, but you made me think about it for the first time when you said, so just to follow up and then we'll open up the Q&A. So now you're going to devote some time to directing. So is there some show running that you have been doing that you're giving up to give your time to directing, or are you still finding a way to handle all the various aspects that you were handling before?
I still think of myself as a show writer and as a showrunner. I mean, being a writer is the thing that I feel defines myself the most, and then as a showrunner, and then the directing is kind of in addition to that. So I sort of think of directing as something that I would do in kind of concurrent with show running, but I haven't placed directing ahead of show running or writing at this point in my career. I feel like I still love the process of telling stories in long form, narratively, in a series, and that's the thing that interests me the most. And also, I'm just not sure I'm a good enough director yet to be just thinking about directing. I think it's great to do that as part of running a show, but I'm still working at trying to get better at my craft.
Okay, Q&As from the audience. Pam writes, I worry I don't have the stomach for the stress of show running. Is that a good reason not to do it? When I worked with you for 3 years, and I don't think I ever saw you angry. I saw you frustrated at times, but it seemed to me that you always had things under control. Does it take a certain personality to showrun, or what do you say to her about how stressful the job is?
Oh, it's for sure stressful. I mean, I mean, I don't think there's any version of it not being stressful, but I think like anything else, if you do it, the more you do it, the less stressful. It kind of goes back to what I was saying at the very beginning. I mean, I felt like I sort of feel in hindsight, like the experience of Briscoe would have been, I mean, it's kind of an impossibility thing, but I feel like it would have been more enjoyable if I didn't feel so stressed, because I really didn't know what I was doing. I was kind of learning on the fly, but I don't think there's any way around it, but you just have, it's a little stressful to start, and then you'll get to a place where, you know, it's less stressful once you've had some experience doing it, in which case I think it's really rewarding. I mean, it's, as you know, Shawn, the ability to kind of think up something, and then all of a sudden, almost literally days later, there are people building a set and rehearsing a scene, and, you know, asking you questions about how you want to execute this idea that was just sort of in your imagination a few days ago. It's absolutely wonderful, you know, and that's a wonderful experience. And so I think you should, you know, push through your concerns and do it.
Connor asks, Lost is often identified with J.J. Abrams' mystery box concept, which has been very influential and polarizing in TV writing. How do you feel about mystery box writing, and has your opinion changed since the Lost finale?
I mean, mysteries are incredibly powerful. And I think that I recognize that, and I think that it's a really great narrative device. And I don't think that. I mean, I'm not sitting here feeling regretful about the Lost finale. I feel like we did the version we wanted to do, and
I love the Lost finale, by the way, which I believe, I know I told Damon that. I don't know if I ever told you that. I thought it emotionally, you can pick apart certain plot. Emotionally, I thought it was devastating and true.
I think mystery's a great story form. I mean, what's the buzziest thing out there right now? White Lotus, and it just starts with the idea that we know that there's like some dead bodies, and next week is the finale. And I'm not spoiling anything by saying, you know, obviously people want to know what is the answer to the mysteries that were posited in the very first part of the show, you know. And so I think it's a great storytelling form, and I hope to continue doing it. But I'm not, you know, it doesn't take, it's not like the most important thing for me in terms of telling a story, but I think it's a really good device in storytelling.
Deborah asks, when you partner with another showrunner, which specific responsibilities do you split and which do you share?
Oh gosh. I mean, in most cases, the responsibilities are shared all the way down the line, and we make all the kind of critical creative decisions together. But in practical terms, it may be that one or the other of us will be on set, and someone else might be working in the writer's room while someone is solving production problems. You know, in the case of Lost, I did a lot of the sort of show running duties at times while Damon was in the room, but all the critical decision making we did together. It depends, and it depends a little bit on who wants to do what. I mean, different people might have different interests, and so I also kind of look at it that, like, we'll sort that out, and we'll figure out who wants to do what. When I was doing Locke Key with Meredith Averill, I mean, she was much more interested in being on set and being involved in the production of the show, and so she did a lot more of that than I did, and was great at that, and I was really grateful that she wanted to go do that.
Yeah, when I did Timeless with Eric Kripke, a lot of similar thing, most of the same, but he was so good with visual effects, he oversaw that. I sort of handled the music. So there'd be a
Yeah.
couple areas we take off our plate. I've had this question asked me before. It's such a simple one. What is the day-to-day like as an EP showrunner? We sort of know because we've done it, but there's a mystery to the outside world. Just lay out like a typical day in your life as a showrunner.
Well, it's funny because I remember you I can't remember where it was. We were talking, I think it was when we were teaching together in the showrunner training program. We were talking about, making lists of all the stuff that you have to do on a given day. And I don't know whether you still do that. But you were talking about how you make a list of all the stuff that you need to do and try to, get that knocked off. And I kind of do that too. I usually, there is kind of no like typical day in some sense. I usually try to do room time in the morning just because that's when I feel like my brain is the most activated. And so try to schedule room time before lunch and then after lunch, deal with production stuff and editing. But I liken show running to being a decathlete. It's a 10 event sport. And you don't have to be the best at any one of those events, but you have to be really good at a lot of them. And so on a given day, you might be editing. On another day, you might be doing music. You might be sound mixing. You might be working with a writer on an outline. You might be solving what do we need to cut because we're over budget. You may be casting, and any given day, what's fun about it is that there are 10 different things that are happening, and you're kind of as this rotating wheel of experiences. And so there isn't really a typical day. It really just depends on what's up next. I think that probably as a showrunner, the one thing that is common is that your serious problems are going to float up to your level, and those things get solved first. Those things get presented to you, and you have to figure out, okay, well, what do I want to do about this or that? And, those may be mundane or they may be more serious, but there's some measure of problem solving or sort of putting out of fires. But then the rest of it is really just sort of this rotating wheel of all the activities that go into completing something that's a piece of filmed entertainment.
I remember John Worth, your number 2 on Nash Bridges, once said to us in the room that breaking stories never gets easier. The only thing that changes with experience is your confidence that you'll eventually be able to break it. I mentioned that as a prelude to this question from Memu. Did you ever deal with procrastination at any time within your career, and what did you do to overcome this? Even a super successful guy like you, breaking stories is hard, doing this is hard. Sometimes you don't feel like doing it that day. How do you break through those walls as a showrunner and writer?
By not treating it too preciously. I think that I remember David Milch saying something to me once that procrastination and perfectionism were opposite sides of the same coin. And there are things that we throw up that basically are kind of, we put them in the path of our subconscious. And what we really want to do as writers is channel our subconscious and, be able to access that thing inside. And, those of you who are on this call, I think, or on this Zoom, understand that, the best part of writing is when you're just in some zone and you're writing and like something happens that you had no expectation was going to happen. And that sort of transcendence is amazing. And I think, but we have a lot of censors. We have a lot of self-doubt. I don't think any writer doesn't question their abilities or the idea, oh, I can never do it again, whatever. But you have to me, it's just about being a little bit more mundane about it, just doing the work and then feeling with confidence and with experience that this may be shitty, but the next time I come back to it, it'll be a little bit better. And the next time it'll be a little bit better, and kind of working through it, eventually get it to a place where maybe it's actually good.
I think we've run out of time. I see it's 1 minute, and I want to take that 1 minute to thank you for sharing such wisdom. I wish we had a few hours to go over the entirety of your career. For those of you watching, I really encourage you to watch 5 Days at Memorial. It truly is fantastic. It's on Apple Plus. Any final words of wisdom you want to share with the audience, Carlton?
No, just thank you guys for coming out and joining us today. And Shawn, thank you for a lot of really smart questions and doing this today. It was really great to see you and to be a part of this with you.
Well, I owe a lot of my career to you, and I'm happy to find any excuse to talk with you, even in front of a huge audience. So we'll do it privately soon. But thank you to the Writers Guild Foundation. Thank you for all of you coming here tonight. Go write the great next show. Carlton and I want to watch it.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.